This is a review of your political socialization notes. You can either use your notes as we play this game at the beginning, or just think of the answers as we go along. The game is called Who is Likely to Vote Republican or Democrat? The first group that we talk about is women. So the question is, are women more likely to vote Republican or Democrat? And you can think of the answer now. Hopefully you answered Democrat. That's correct. So in general, women as a voting bloc are more likely to vote Democrat. All right, we'll go on. If you're age 65 or older, are you likely to vote Republican or Democrat? Hopefully you answered Republican. Generally, older Americans have built up some wealth, and they like to keep that wealth instead of handing it over to the government in the form of taxes, and so they tend to vote Republican. Or you may remember that as people age, they tend to start out liberal and then end up more conservative. It's another way to think of it. So non-white citizens, are they more likely to vote Republican or Democrat? Hopefully you answered Democrat. And liberals, are they more likely to vote Republican or Democrat? Hopefully you answered Democrat. Sort of the definition of what a liberal is. They tend to be Democrats, but of course they are just more likely to vote Democrat. That certainly doesn't mean that every liberal votes Democrat in every election. An important thing to remember. So if you're an adult and you have achieved only a high school education, meaning that you didn't go to college after high school and you entered the working world, are you more likely to vote Republican or Democrat? Hopefully you answered Republican. People that are tend to go to college, they usually end up becoming a little bit more liberal with the more education they get. It's a good way to remember that one. So persons with a high school diploma only tend to vote Republican. If you're a married citizen, are you more likely to vote Republican or Democrat? Hopefully you answered Republican. If you are a person who attends church weekly, or another way to think of it is all the people who attend church every week, if they all got together and went to vote, would they be more likely to vote Republican or Democrat? Hopefully you answered Republican. These folks tend to be just more conservative in general, and they are more likely to vote Republican. You can also remember that Republican values tend to include religion in all aspects of life. It's another way to remember that one. If you live on the East Coast, maybe more specifically the Northeast, are you more likely to vote Republican or Democrat? Hopefully you said Democrat. And that concludes our little game of who is likely to vote Republican or Democrat, a good review for the upcoming test. In class we talked about how do we know about these trends or these large generalizations about how women vote, or how men vote, or how whites vote, or how minorities vote. Well, the answer to that is that we poll people. So Mr. McDonald doesn't just make these facts up off the top of his head. He has read many books about people written by people who do all kinds of polls. You may think of them as exit polls. So when you go to vote, there are people that stand outside of the polls and take down information of all the people that voted. They may say, Mr. McDonald, how did you vote? And he tells them, and then they say, and who are you? Are you married? How old are you? Do you go to church every Sunday? What do you believe? All of those sorts of things. They compile all of these statistics. So these come from statistics. So I have a few more questions. What percentage of women voted for Obama in 2012? You may remember that women in general vote for Democrats, and of course Obama is a Democrat. We know that women are more likely to vote for Obama, which means that the percentage would be above 50. But you may be surprised to learn that it is only 55%. So that means that 45% of all of the women that voted in the last election voted for Mitt Romney or another candidate, but probably mostly Mitt Romney. What percentage of people who make $100,000 or more a year voted for Romney in 2012? You may remember that people who make a lot of money, who are generally wealthy, tend to vote Republican, and so you would suspect that this number was probably over 50%. You might be surprised to learn that it was only 54%. So we say that the wealthy are more likely to vote Republican, but here if we qualify it, we may see that they're only slightly more likely to vote Republican. What percentage of African Americans voted for Obama in 2012? We know that minorities tend to vote for Democrats, and so we suspect that this is over 50%, but we may be surprised to learn that it is actually 93%. So we would not just say that minorities tend to vote Democrat, but we would say that minorities overwhelmingly vote Democrat, and this means that only 7% of African Americans in the 2012 election voted for Mitt Romney or another candidate. So a place that you might go to look at these statistics is this website for Gallup. Go ahead and take a look at that if you want. It has all sorts of statistics for the last 50 years of elections. This is where all the numbers come from that help us to make these large generalizations that we talk about in class. So some important things to remember. Of course, political socialization is not destiny. It doesn't mean that all women vote for Democrats or that all of the wealthy vote for a Republican candidate, but it certainly does have a very strong influence. We know we've talked about political views that change over a lifetime, whether that's people getting generally more conservative as they age, or sometimes there are life events that happen that change people's political views, like natural disasters, or Sandy is a great example, because if that affected you, it may change the way you decide to vote in an election based on how you felt the government met your needs following that disaster. Something to remember, political views change over time. Additionally, when we say more likely, it may mean a very slight majority, as we saw with some of the statistics, or a very large majority. So just remember that more likely means above 50%, but could mean as much as 99%. And if this sort of stuff interests you, then definitely think about majoring in political science when you go to college, or sociology to study these demographics. And that is our review of political socialization.